the recommendations from Council. In order to review its position, Cabinet will need specialist legal and financial advice. That advice will cover the requirements of the Council and its Section 151 officer, as well as the necessary legal advice covering procurement and the CPO process as a whole. Subject to Cabinet agreement, a specialist firm of lawyers will formally be appointed to advise accordingly. I'm sure you've all had a chance to read the report. I'd like to move recommendations as 6.1 and 6.2. 6.1, that Cabinet agrees the recommendation from Council on the 21st May 2015 to review its position in relation to the Manston Airport site, take account of all the surrounding circumstances relating to an indemnity partner for a possible compulsory purchase order. And recommendation 6.2, Cabinet authorises that specialist legal and finance advice be obtained to determine whether River Oak are a suitable indemnity partner in relation to a CPO for Manston Airport, and to provide advice on the indemnity agreement and the CPO process generally. Do I have a seconder for those proposals?
Yes, I'll second that, and I would like to just say that I'd be hopeful that the specialist legal and financial advice can be sought, received and acted upon as expeditiously as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Bayford, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to remind you that you won the district elections primarily on the back of your and Mr Farage's contention that you wouldn't prevaricate like the long-established political parties would, and you put no caveats on that. I believe Mr Farage was suggesting that we might see planes back in a week, but that might have been some of his hubris, but you never know. But here we are, we're 2 months on, and we're starting yet another process.
Yeah.
You'll no doubt claim prudence, but I think that what you're proposing could have been identified on May the 8th, and the PwC report I don't think has been particularly enlightening. I think that what it suggests we already would have recognised needed to be done. I'm quite surprised that you're proposing spending at least another £10,000 of taxpayers' money. Some 24,000 has already been spent. And what I'm surprised about this is that River Oak, as far as I know, have always been willing to meet the expenses of the council, and I would imagine that they still would be. So I would like to ask whether in fact you intend to take them up on that offer. But when it comes to this spending, again, you know, we're going through again this procurement process, tender process and whatever, which again is another fantastic time waster. When we look at getting legal advice or this special accounting advice, I just wonder what criteria you're going to apply and whether you're going to find 3 firms that would actually meet the criteria, because it seems to me that it's less of a cost issue, it's more of a quality issue. I think that when it comes to this, this is a unique situation, but there are of course close parallels elsewhere with local authorities being involved with a back-to-back indemnity partner to purchase an asset that they are then going to take over. And I would have thought that what we should be seeking is the best legal advice, the most appropriate, the most experienced, and I hope that we're going to do that. We talk about £10,000, but I'd also question what exactly you get for £10,000. I wonder whether that's a realistic budget. And certainly you talk about getting council's opinion, and I would have thought that was vital, but I just question how much council's time you buy for £10,000, and I would have thought it was not a lot. I would like to take this opportunity to remind the public that the Conservative Group remain committed to the CPO process, and we want to see planes back at Manston as soon as possible. And in conclusion, I'd just like to ask you to be honest at all times with the residents of Thanet and keep them honestly appraised of the situation and where we're going and what the likely outcome is. Because I'm sorry, this has a slight feel that this administration may be spinning things out long enough for the decision to somehow be made for you rather than have to take it yourselves. And I hope that you want to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Gregory, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. you've got an unusual situation in Thanet Villages ward. I'm speaking as a ward councillor more than anything else here, in that we have 3 councillors of 3 or 2 different political persuasions and one of no political persuasion, and we are all totally agreed that the 2 recommendations that you put forward are the best for the villages, the best for Manston and the best for Thanet. But, and it's a big but, was noted with concern the other day that the leader of Kent County Council and I believe the MP for Folkestone and the Chief Constable seem to be tilting a little windmill in our direction, if you like, by saying they'd like to use Manston as a temporary overflow for Operation Stack. I'd urge you strongly to go against that. A, to put every obstruction in the way to stop it, because the people in the villages cannot cope with lorry drivers of whatever country they come from using their sat-navs to drag them through tiny little lanes, because the connections between Manston and Dover are notoriously bad. You may have got the main road travelling from Thanet down towards Dover, starts out as single carriageway, goes on to dual carriageway, goes on to single carriageway. So what the lorry drivers are going to do is cut through the countryside wherever their sat-nav takes them, and that puts an unbearable burden upon the residents in those villages, which most of them have schools with young children, and we don't want to end up being villages like Leeds just outside Maidstone, where they're continually getting buildings and people and vehicles damaged by heavy vehicles using the wrong sort of road. And I would urge that you make every representation to the leader of Kent County Council to stop talking this ridiculous nonsense about making Manston a temporary lorry park.
Yes.
To take the last point first, if I may, I believe I did dismiss Councillor Carter's fantasies about lorry parking. I think it was a sentence and a half, but the half said the idea was daft. In answer to Councillor Bayford's point, I think maybe if I could give you an idea of the summary of the instructions that are going to go to the lawyer that is going to act on our behalf here, it might answer some of your questions. Summarised in 4 points: to please contact RAGS, who are the solicitors for River Oak, and initially request the reimbursements of the council's cost to date, that would be the 24 to 26,000 referred to, and confirm the need for future communication to be lawyer to lawyer. If payment is agreed, then to please advise on the guarantees of financial comfort we could and should demand from River Oak to satisfy the Section 151 officer before we agree to enter into any indemnity agreement. In particular, advise on the proposed lawyer's bank account as set out in the letter to TDC of 31st May and clause 10 of the draft indemnity agreement, and the benefits or otherwise of a letter of credit from a major financial institution. 3. Please consider the draft indemnity agreement generally. 4. Please advise on the probity or ethics from the Council's perspective of River Oak funding the Council's future legal advice. And that last point, I think, is an important one, in that whilst it is reasonable for us to approach River Oak, and they've indicated, I think, in meetings we have had with them, they were willing to do so, would refund the money expended to date. In terms of keeping any decision that may end in the CPO with very clean hands, I think it is probably not appropriate to ask River Oak up front to pay for the legal opinion that might actually work with them in the future in order to actually decide whether or not the indemnity partnership status is what we actually need for the Section 151 officer. But I would underline for you that what is different here to what happened over 12, 14, maybe longer wasted months under the previous administration is we're moving straight to solicitor contact. I remember going and talking to the previous legal officer on this point some months ago and was told that actually what was needed was solicitor contact after we'd actually qualified as a partner and after actually we sorted out whether or not these things were appropriate in terms of keeping the council's position safe. I take a different view. It seems to me that you do rather better if you employ the solicitors to make sure those things don't go wrong before you start, rather than actually employ solicitors thereafter to mop up the bits that you have missed. And as such, in terms of keeping the council's position safe, one of the things that this particular lawyer will do on our behalf is to look at the indemnity agreement and tell us what safeguards that actually do particularly assist and apply, rather than separating those items artificially as has happened in the past. As a result, the motion that Cabinet may pass tonight actually leaves in a position whereby we then have the freedom to negotiate up to and including the full wording of the indemnity agreement, and that Cabinet's next involvement would be, assuming all of those things go right, moving the indemnity agreement and bringing it to this Council for agreement and actually starting the process of the CPO from that appointment of indemnity partner forward. So I would disagree with you that this is a way of stretching things out. I think it is quite the reverse. What we have done is identify a route that actually will allow us to move swiftly to an agreed indemnity agreement, rather than doing what's been done previously and artificially dividing the process into a large number of different steps, each of which requires a different proof ratio within them. And as such, I would think that we are probably talking in terms of weeks rather than months before we hear of this again. And as such, I believe that we are actually going to be able to look at River Oak, view them in a different way than they were viewed before, simply because, as the PricewaterhouseCoopers report tells us, there are other ways of measuring financial worth and financial ability than those that were within the appropriate protocols that were used by this Council before. We're moving to actually see if we can move this fast, simply because of the wasted year that sits behind us. And as such, I hope and trust that we'll be moving this forward very soon. And I would add, as has been trailed, I actually consciously have continued to talk to Messrs. Carter and Musgrave, Cartner and Musgrave, oops, Cartner and Musgrave, and expectations are. I have been the only politician or officer, I think, who has gone and visited the flagship park in Billingham at Wynyard Park and seen how they operate as landlords. And to an extent, I would have to say that this district council, I think, is rather luckier than it realises. We actually have two very different visions competing to actually work with us in developing a major regeneration site in the heart of our island. For me, the difference between the two is simple and straightforward. One of them operates from and uses an existing asset which the rest of this country is actually wrestling about, wanting to spend millions and years of building runways elsewhere, and we have one here that's there, ready to use, well maintained and able to be used. The other seems to rely on beginning by tearing that asset up. And I'm not convinced that in times of austerity, tearing assets up is the way forward. Sweating those assets to the best of our ability may certainly be the way that we should move and the way that we should go.
Absolutely.
All right, any comments from Cabinet, or do you wish to move to a vote? Okay. Please indicate all those in agreement, please, with recommendations 6.1 and 6.2 as in the report presented to you this evening. Okay? Thank you. That concludes our business this evening, and I wish you a safe journey home, and hope you didn't mind coming out for such a short event.